Good morning, I'm Phil Stokes from PwC. It's going to be my great pleasure in a few minutes to bring out Punit Goenka from Z and also to talk to Roma Khanna from MGM. But before, just to set the scene, I wanted to walk you through a few highlights from this year's forecast from PwC, the Entertainment and Media Outlook. For those of you who've seen it before, you'll know that it's a forward-looking view. We look at the trends and drivers of the industry, and we try to convert those trends and drivers into revenue streams. So who's actually going to be making money in the entertainment and media industries for a 5-year period? And this year's forecast goes out to 2017. It covers 50 different countries. Actually, this year we've added Kenya and Nigeria as 2 new fast growth countries around the world. And it covers 13 individual segments. Now, I always have to say when I've got my telecoms friends with me, of course, internet access spending is not really an entertainment and media revenue flow, but we track it in this report because it's such an important determinant of many of the platforms and many of the ways that consumers are accessing media. So the overall theme for this year is it's a complicated world out there. It's fast moving. Some of the boundaries between organizations are blurring in a way they never have before, and consumers are increasingly in control. And therefore, what do you do if you're a leader of an organization, of a business in this sort of environment? Well, we think that actually placing the consumer at the heart of the strategy, but having agility and innovation and a reason to exist is really important. So although when we see the numbers, you'll see that traditional media will still continue to dominate in terms of revenue flows over the next 5 years, it's the growth and the growth that's coming from digital which is the story within it. And therefore, whether you're a media organization in any of those 13 segments, actually thinking about why do I exist? Why do people choose to spend time with me and my products rather than spend their time and their money with a competitor? Why am I relevant? That has profound implications for products and services, for business and operational organization, and also for what is the customer experience and how do I give something that's relevant to my consumers. So we'll start with some big picture numbers. We'll have a look at it geographically, and then we'll have a look at it between those 13 segments. So geographically first, we've split the world into 4 buckets this year. The first bucket is a really big and important one. So in terms of revenue, it is twice the size of all of the other 3 categories put together. But it's also the slowest growing. So 3.7% per annum growth. So 3.7% for each of the next 5 years in our forecasts. And these are the mature markets like the US, the UK, and much of Western Europe. The next wave, growing at 11.6% per annum for the next 5 years. So a lot of growth coming there, and actually also growing to be significant in size as well. Nearly $500 billion, which would represent a little over 20% of the entire entertainment and media market that we track in 2017. So fast growth and becoming significant in terms of size. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, Argentina, Indonesia, also Middle East and North Africa in that category. The up-and-comers, smaller but fast growing, so also growth rates of over 11%. Smaller at the moment, but I think at the end of this 2017 5-year period, what we'll see is that those are beginning to become important territories as well. And then there's the rest, the slower growing, smaller, largely in mature parts of the industry, and therefore not quite so interesting. But in terms of a balanced portfolio and looking for growth, we'll talk about digital in a second, but geographically, looking at that next wave and the up-and-comers, that's where the growth globally is. So what drives advertising and consumer spending? Well, that's a really big question, but we settled this year on seeing 2 major trends. The first is the very simple access to the internet, and then the second is what device are you doing it on? So particularly connected devices and mobile devices. So the numbers on the right-hand side is numbers we've just seen. So the 3.7% was the growth in the mature markets. If you track that across into also growth rates for broadband internet access and importantly, mobile internet access as well, then you'll see the growth rates coming through in the mature markets, the next wave and the up-and-comers, correlate quite strongly through into how fast is a market going to grow overall. So just putting that a different way, broadband house penetration, actually in the mature markets reaching 85% by the end of the forecast period. Very, very fast growth in the next wave and the up-and-comers. But actually, even by the end of the forecast period in 2017, lots more capacity for growth, so still less than half of the population with penetration of broadband households by the end of the forecast. And even more interestingly, growth in mobile internet. So even in the mature markets there, a growth in mobile internet subscriptions from 24% in 2008 up to 83% in 2017. That's a compound annual growth rate of almost 16% per annum for that 10-year period. And it's not often we get to see growth rates of that size in a mature market. But even more stunning in the next wave and the up-and-comers. And again, at the end of the forecast period, lots and lots of capacity for more growth because only half of the population penetrated with mobile internet. And despite the fact that smartphones have been around for 10 years, it's still smartphones which are continuing to drive that market, in addition to tablets. Now, tablets are a relatively new phenomenon, but IDC this year forecasts that the sales of tablets will actually exceed both the sales of laptops and the sales of desktop PCs individually. And by the end of this forecast period, 2017, sales of tablets will exceed both laptops and desktop PCs combined. So that's a really, really fast growth area, and of course is enabling consumers to be much more in control because they're mobile. That's geography. Let's talk a little bit about the 13 segments. So the grey bar in the middle was the 5.6% that we think the entire market will grow at. It'll grow to about $2.1 trillion by the end of the forecast period. The fastest growth, internet advertising, internet access, and video games. Now, these numbers are all real numbers, so they're not nominal, they're not inflation adjusted. So just a word of caution over when you see something like a 3% growth rate. If you think inflation is also growing at 3%, then actually you're running really, really hard just to stand still if your industry is growing at 3%. Because internet and video games are fast growing overall, actually they're attracting quite a consequent amount of advertising. Video games is a smaller amount in total, but internet advertising is the real growth story here. You'll see some other parts of the more mature markets within the entertainment industry actually suffering some decline on advertising. Television has traditionally been the largest recipient of advertising, and we think that will continue to be the case over the 5-year period, staying steady at about 34%. Internet is the fast growth one there, growing from 21% to 31%, and actually taking market share primarily from newspapers and from consumer magazines. Now, this chart that you're looking at here takes all internet advertising, all advertising online, and lumps it into that internet category. But of course, some of that internet advertising is going to more traditional types of media owners. So it's going to newspaper websites, or it's going to pre-roll on a television website. So if we reallocate that internet advertising back out into the segments that are earning it, you get a slightly different picture. It still shows newspapers in decline, but the internet that's left here now is pretty much pure search within there, with everything else reallocated back out. Now, still looking at this, television continues to be steady at 35% of the entire market. And the interesting thing for me is that if you put the internet and television together, it will grow from 51% to 58% of all advertising, which says something to me about the growth of the second screen, the growth of the third screen, but also those being complementary, so not disrupting the television side of things. Here is that global internet advertising, carved out into the various bits. So the big component, the 70% of that primarily being search, but this is who else we think is going to be earning their fair share of that internet advertising as we go forward. But online television advertising will continue to be quite a small component of the overall television advertising itself. So lots and lots of talk about digital, lots and lots of talk about over-the-top television and different types of models, but traditional television will remain very, very strong over this forecast period. How about consumer spending? So that was advertising, this is consumer spending. Slower growth, 2.9% overall as compared to the 4.8% we just saw for advertising going forward. Home video, there's a really good examination of what's going on with digital. So electronic home video, digital delivery, growing very, very quickly over the forecast period. Physical home video, while still a large revenue generator, in decline over the period, 5% per annum for each of the 5 years. And we forecast that at that rate, electronic home video will exceed the physical home video in 2015. Global TV subscriptions still healthy, growing at over 4% per annum. And as the middle class in the developing economies emerges, actually Asia Pacific will overtake EMEA in terms of revenue, subscription revenue for television in 2016. OTT, we've got a session on OTT that we're running tomorrow. It'll have a lot more detail about our views on OTT and what consumers are looking for and privacy concerns, etc. Please come along to that if you're interested. OTT will be a relatively small component of the market even by 2017, but it's really important and can't be ignored because it's showing the early adopters and how they want to interact with content anytime, anywhere. So that's a barrage of numbers, geography, advertising, consumer spending, different segments of the market. But so what? I mean, we know the world is fast moving and we know it's complicated. If you're a media executive running an organization, what do you do? Well, at PwC, we start quite a lot with what are consumers telling us? So what are we hearing? Rather than if we build it, they will come, we spend time thinking with consumers, how do they want to interact with brands? How do they want to interact with media? What are they telling us about their experience and their desires? So what have we heard so far? Well, the multi-screen experience is new. It's new, but it's fast growing, and there are different segments of the demographics when we talk to them as to the number of people who are comfortable with a second screen open while they're watching a main screen, and indeed the usage pattern as to whether second screen or over the top is used as a catch-up mechanism or whether it's becoming the primary device. And certainly amongst the younger generation, while linear TV and the second screen is a consistent experience, they're also using the mobile device as a primary screen a lot of the time. People are paying for quality and experience. What's valuable? Live entertainment, something that enables you to be part of a conversation, something that you genuinely can't get somewhere else. All that stuff is valuable. Whether it's valuable in terms of spending time or subscription money, the different values can be translated in different ways. In a world where perhaps content there's so much content that you can't consume it all, how do you find what you want? Well, we believe that that's through search. You know what you're looking for and you go and find it. Through recommendation, either through peers or networks that you're part of, or through brand. And that's where the linear television and the aggregation of content which you trust comes through. But recommendations shape choice. It's my time, I'll watch it when I want to, but actually I might want to be tweeting or to engaging with social media about it, so it's my time, but it's a shared experience. iBooks are a big new phenomenon. Those look like they're topping out at about 20-25% of the whole market at the moment. Consumers are concerned and they're frustrated by connectivity, which is the infrastructure, but also by windows and rights barriers. So we hear that a lot when we go through. And they're also saying, I'm happy to volunteer up some privacy, some information in return for stuff back in return. But if I'm going to do that, make it worth my while. And we're at an interesting part in history where perhaps the technology we have at home is better than the technology we have in our workplace. And therefore workplaces need to catch up with the experience that we're having, and therefore the experience that businesses offer to their customers needs to catch up with the quality and experience that people are finding in their lives at home. And love it or hate it, we find people who say that they're always on, they never switch off, and actually it's a constant use of society. Entertainment and media companies focused on growth. We survey about 1,300 CEOs each year. Entertainment and media companies more focused on growth, but more focused on profitable growth, not just driving growth for the sake of top-line revenue numbers, really driving down to what does this mean for my business in terms of profits. We think, therefore, that in order to be successful, you're going to need to think about the agility of your organization, a real understanding of what consumers want and how they interact with you, and you may have to move from aggregating and controlling communities into curating, being part of a conversation where your customers already are. The barriers between each of the organizations blurring, content creators becoming distributors, distributors producing their own content, and that whole ecosystem changing, but mostly at the moment for the benefit of consumers. Those connected consumers, well, they're driving the whole experience at the moment. They want to be in control. There's a lot of talk about fragmentation. Well, actually, as a consumer, I don't feel fragmented. What I want is ubiquity. I want to have the access to that content across whatever platform I choose. But it does mean that we're going to need to be serviced in a different way, and we're going to pick that up in the two conversations that we're about to have. Advertisers will have to spend more time thinking about the analytics. Why are people engaged? I'm also going to pick up data analytics with our two interviewees, because data analytics is seen, and big data is seen as the panacea, but actually it's the little data at the heart of big data that's important. It's how do you get the insight and analysis to enable you to make an informed management decision that's important. So that relies on the proper tools and a proper understanding as to what you're going to use data for. To stay relevant, content creators are going to have to think about what they produce and how they create it to make sure it's fit for purpose for all of the different platforms, and that people want to engage with it, whether it's long form or short form, the live experience as to the catch-up experience. And if you're a distributor, well, the important thing is this stuff gets to people, and it gets to people in a way that's easy, it's seamless, and speaks to that ubiquity I was talking about. I want to be able to access this stuff, and distributors want to get it to me, but it does involve a capital expenditure to get the infrastructure in place and new methods of driving that content to people. So we use a circle that says you've got to know what you're for in the digital age, you've got to define your purpose, you need to evolve your business, you need to create the value, and once you've worked out how you want to create and innovate new things, accelerate that through your organization so you can really drive the change, and then maximize your advantage from it by protecting the value that you've just created.